Good afternoon and welcome to the DC Water and Vertex webinar, Changing the Way CIS Implementations Are Executed Better, Faster, and Cheaper. My name is Rick Cutter and I'm with Cloud for Utilities, a utility industry organization focused on education related to Cloud for Utilities industry. I'm pleased to introduce Vertex, a founding technology partner of Cloud for Utilities. Vertex serves over 30 electric, gas, and water utilities across North America. Their customers serve over 10 million end customers. Vertex delivers solutions for CIS, ERP, MDM, EAM, mobile work management, customer sellers, and many others. Vertex does the technology-heavy lifting, enabling utilities to focus on their core utility business. DC Water and Sewer Authority is one of the leading water utilities in the United States. Created in 1996 literally by an act of Congress, and in 2010 they were rebranded as DC Water. They serve more than 800,000 residents and 21 million annual visitors. They also have one of the more interesting customer bases in our industry. Try cutting off their big customers and see what happens. I'm going to introduce now our panelist. Tom Kaczynski is the Chief Information Officer of DC Water. Tom heads up an IT team of over 60 individuals with a $20 million budget. Tom served as co-executive sponsor for the Vertex One customer platform implementation. He also manages the operational agreements in all aspects of these systems. Tom has over 40 years of experience in information technology, including nearly 30 years at Philadelphia Gas Works. Tom is a graduate from LaSalle College of Philadelphia and the Executive MBA program at University of Maryland University College. This implementation was his fourth CIS implementation in his career. This one's so easy he wants to do a financial system next, I understand, but we'll let Tom tell us more about that later. Next is Charlie Keeley. He's the Assistant General Manager of DC Water. Charlie has been in the industry for 40 years and has extensive experience in electric, gas, water, utilities. Over 15 years with DC Water and is responsible for the retail service side of the business. Not only is Charlie responsible for the contact centers and billing and meter operations, he's also responsible for things like water treatment distribution, stormwater management, water quality and technology, emergency management, and many more. Mr. Keeley has worked closely with Tom to establish the cloud strategy at DC Water and served as the co-executive sponsor for the Vertex One CIS project. This implementation was his third CIS implementation in his career. Charlie said this was his last, though, I believe. But anyway, as the single largest user of IT services, Charlie brings a balanced approach to cloud solutions, weighing operational efficiencies and the cloud wave against security concerns. Next is Chiden from Vertex. Chiden is the Director of Application Services for Vertex One Division. He's got 20 years of experience in various leadership and architecture roles, 16 years of SAP and 10 years of CIS experience specific to the SAP CR&B for utilities. Chiden brings extensive leadership, technical delivery, and architectural responsibilities that help build, integrate, and deliver solid solutions for complex problems. He served as the program director on the DC Water implementation. A couple of notes for you guys. The Q&A process will be handled at the end of the webinar. You should see a Q&A panel on your screen, and you can submit questions at any time. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the webinar. The webinar is planned for about 40 minutes. However, the panelists will stay on extra time for a few more questions if needed. Feel free to also reach out directly to the panelists for questions after the webinar. In regards to our agenda, let me do a quick walkthrough of that. We're going to talk about DC's strategy for change, what was implemented, how do they do it better, faster, and cheaper. They're going to go through some of those specifics for you, setting new industry benchmarks, and an explanation of the $22 million in cost savings they plan for the next 7 years. So exciting stuff. So let's get started. Tom, can you tell me a little bit about the overall strategy?
Sure, yes. Rick, DC Water's Blue Horizon 2020 strategy outlines 8 goals necessary for it to achieve its vision of a world-class water utility. 2 of those goals, enhance customer, stakeholder confidence, communications, and perception, and enhance operating excellence through innovation, sustainability, and adoption of best practices, form the underlying IT strategy. There are 3 key tenets to the IT strategy. A cloud-first approach, where we look at cloud solutions with each new implementation as the primary objective for deploying new technology. Anything, anywhere, and any time, our ability to deliver seamless services across any channel, any place, and any communications technology. And last but not least, our buy and adopt strategy, where we buy what we can and we adopt the functionality that comes with the product.
Okay, great. Thank you, Tom. Tom, what were some of the key benefits that you guys are processing now?
As you can imagine, there's a number, Rick, and I won't go through all of them, but I want to highlight a few. On the cloud-first strategy, first and foremost, it's designed to reduce ongoing operating risks. To reduce skills obsolescence of our staff, and most importantly, allow internal staff to focus on higher value services. So rather than being a hardware and software company, we want to be a solutions provider for our customers. Our buy and adopt approach allows us to implement, the implementation cycle times are substantially reduced and allows us to deploy technology faster than we could in the past. The ability to adopt best practices more quickly is enabled by an buy and adopt strategy because we adopt the functionality that's in the application rather than trying to customize it to what we perceive to be our unique needs. And lastly, better prediction and management of operating and capital costs. We're able to better understand what our long-term costs are, and we're able to budget appropriately and then manage those costs more completely than we could in the past. And our anything, anywhere, and anytime approach eliminates the tether to the desktop. It provides consistency of information across devices, regardless of location or connectivity method. More importantly, it gives customers and employees the same data at the same time through the same interface.
That's great. That is great. And Tom, regarding the cloud-first approach, I mean, you really do want to put as many apps in the cloud as you can, is my understanding, correct?
We absolutely do, Rick, with the exception of some strategic applications for modeling and predictive analytics, which are actually fairly processor intensive, but also quite unique. Almost everything we're doing is moving to the cloud. We've been on Office 365 for an extended period of time. Most of our HCM solutions are already running in the cloud. Now CIS, as well as our mobile work management system, plus our customer portal and our bill payment and presentment platforms are now all in the cloud. So that's well over 75% of our application portfolio, and we're looking to move the remainder of those to the cloud as well over the coming years.
That's great. You guys are really putting mission-critical apps in the cloud, so that's kudos to you guys. Let's see, next process here. What were some of the key drivers for the new system change, Tom?
So there were a number of them, and they focused on three primary areas: the customer, operations, and technology. First and foremost, we had a limited set of customer self-service features, and we wanted to expand those capabilities. We had inconsistency across our channel capabilities as well. So our IVR, our phone center, and our web applications, none of them had the same set of solutions available to them, and none of them delivered those capabilities in the same way. From an operations perspective, we had limited ability to automate work processes. So we had a lot of offline tracking and offline reporting capabilities because our systems weren't fully integrated. And it was very, very difficult to adopt new work processes because of the cumbersome nature of the applications and the cost and the effort to implement those processes within the system. And from a technology perspective, changes were expensive and complex to make. It could cost us months and hundreds, if not millions of dollars to implement what today can be traditionally deployed in months or in weeks or months rather than months or years. And finally, we had increased operational risk with our old technology because it was 40 years old. And it's not only a physical limitation, but a capabilities limitation because the resources available to deploy new functionality in the old applications were limited as well.
Great, great, thank you. How did customer service drive part of the decision-making process?
Well, again, traditional customer service was all phone-based. So a customer would call us and they'd log a complaint. We'd log that complaint. We'd do research and we'd get back to the customer as soon as we found a problem. But the new approach and the preference of new customers is really to do those things anytime and primarily using mobile devices. So we needed to drive a lot of our processes out to the customer in the form of self-service. We also need to provide channels that weren't available to us in the past, primarily a mobile work or a mobile platform for the customer. We needed to be able to provide those services 24/7 rather than our traditional call center hours of Monday to Friday, 7 to 5. Customers wanted multiple bill options. Customers want self-service, as we said before. and they want the flexibility to make payments when they want and how they want. And our old systems actually didn't allow us to do that. They wanted real-time notifications when there were outages or issues with their bill. They wanted to be able to make appointments, cancel appointments, and reschedule appointments without having to call the call center and wait on hold until a representative was available. And they wanted a bill that actually was more easily understood. Last but not least, social media has become a big outlet for us from a communications perspective, and they wanted us to provide more transparency across not only billing systems but all operational aspects of our DC Water, which were limited with the capabilities that we had with our old website and our old portal.
Chiden, I think this question is best for you here, but what were some of the major components of the solutions you guys implemented?
Sure, Rick. The scope of the project consisted of a comprehensive and flexible Tier 1 platform managed in an enterprise cloud using a software-as-a-service model with a 7-year plus support contract. The foundation of the solution, Vertex One, is Vertex's CIS solution, which is based on SAP's CIS solution, CRMB, Customer Relationship and Billing. It is running on SAP's Business Suite on HANA in-memory database. We also rolled out the latest Vertex self-service solution called Customer Advantage, which includes the web and mobile self-service, and also Kona's latest mobile workforce management solution. For reporting and analytics, we enabled customized HANA 360 live views built specific for DC water consumed by business objects. All the systems within the platform are integrated using SAP process orchestration as the enterprise service bus maintained by Vertex. With our enterprise SaaS model, all the environments, development, testing, and production are hosted and maintained by Vertex with the upgrades on an N-1 schedule.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation. Sounds like you really used a lot of the SAP stack to help develop your overall solution, so that sounds great. Next question I think also is best suited for you, Chiden, is can you walk us through sort of the agile implementation process you guys do to accomplish that 12-month project?
Sure, I can. The project timeline was a 12-month end-to-end project using a hybrid agile waterfall methodology. The 7-year contract was negotiated in 2 months, started in December 2016, and we went live December 2017. DC Water wanted to bring the new customer self-service functions live sooner than the 12 months, so we actually brought that live on top of the legacy CIS. This helped to show value sooner and work out any additional call volumes prior to the CIS go live. So before I get into the timeline, a lot of people ask, how were you able to do it in such a short time, better, faster, and cheaper, and still have minimal defects, no P1 defects at go live? We hear people say they just threw resources at it, or they made people work 80 hours a week to accomplish it. That wasn't the case. We operated with a normal, fully loaded project plan utilizing an onshore-offshore model. I'm going to highlight how we did it related to the methodology, and Tom will overview a few other enablers. The first enabler was the foundation for the project called Fast Start. This is Vertex's full ETL data migration with DC water production data. This ran in parallel with the planning phase. This migration set the stage for all future phases and also set the baseline initial mocks for all subsequent migrations. Fast Start allowed us to hit the ground running with the next phase, Lean Blueprint, which was a little over 3 months and consisted of key process area demos and fit gap workshops. The team got to see the demos of their built system with DC water production data, which speeded up not only blueprint, but build, testing, and training. Our second enabler was how we executed blueprinting utilizing a design by exception approach. The team leveraged the baseline Vertex One solution as much as possible, reviewing 250 Vertex One user stories prescribed by Vertex on a migrated system instead of coming in with a blank slate and designing from the ground up. Being able to blueprint using a prescribed solution with real data was key in meeting the 12-month target. Any gaps from the fit gap sessions would go into a backlog, which were assigned to sprints. That leads us into our next enabler, the hybrid agile methodology. Our hybrid agile approach incorporated the the best practices of a dynamic, flexible, agile model with the rigor of a waterfall toll gates and QA/QC best practices. Realization was the longest phase of the project, 8 months. We had 5 1.5-month sprints with 400 or so FRAX-W objects, systems integration tests, parallel tests with 4 billing cycles, security roles testing, and performance and stress testing. Each sprint was like a mini project where we designed, built, and tested the backlog, setting the stage for the next sprint. Although realization was the busiest time of the project, it moved smoothly by employing a daily scrum where a key stakeholder was always present to make key decisions right away. In final prep, we performed our final mock dress rehearsals, which is the last mock cutover, and completed pre-cutover tasks. Cutover was 3 days, and go-live was on 12/11 with post-go-live hypercare. So before I leave the methodology, some things that helped to deliver in 12 months. First, we focused on functionality we needed now to grow with the solution. Because our service runs 7+ years, we are able to help DC Water focus on those requirements they need in the next 12 months versus trying to plan for everything they might need in 10 years. We aren't going anywhere, and the ongoing managed SaaS model allows us to put in the functionality as they need and want it. Also, not only faster, we also did it better. We don't rush through an implementation just to get it done and then leave after stabilization. We are still there as DC Water's partner. If something is broken, we as Vertex are on the hook to make sure that the system is running and functioning as it should. We are managed through strict service levels that are aligned with DC Water's desired business outcomes. Also, there is a managed, cloud-managed enterprise SaaS, so there's no infrastructure procurement for DC Water, no technical knowledge transfer required for their staff. Vertex handles all of that on their behalf.
Tom, let me ask you this question, Tom. Can you give us some insights on maybe some of the key elements beyond just the implementation methodology you guys may have deployed?
Sure, Rick. And no matter how often it's said or how often we hear it, people often forget and ignore what I think is one of the most critical components of a successful project, and that's really the team. You need to build a diverse team, and you need to turn them loose. You need to change their reporting relationships. You need to make this their only job. You cannot do these projects part-time. You need to co-locate the team together, both integrators and in-house personnel, so that they can develop the shared vision of what the future is going to be. And you need to target performance goals to the project milestones. But most importantly, you need to have fun at the same time.
So true, so true. Next item for you, Tom, as well is what were some of the critical areas regarding to process design to deliver?
I think it starts with aggressively managing scope and expectations, Rick. As we said earlier, we have a buy and adopt strategy. We're not as unique as we often believe we are. And the reality is we can often accept the functionality in an application as it's delivered rather than changing it to meet some perceived uniqueness in our business. And we were very, very specific about that early on in the project. And we said we would adopt it unless someone could prove that the functionality didn't work. And that's the design by exception. Okay, the exception had to be that it absolutely can't meet my needs, not that it doesn't currently meet my current need. You need to avoid delays in the decision-making process. We had a very specific schedule for identifying issues and then resolving those issues. And it was very compressed. It was 3 days. An issue was raised. The issue was developed with recommendations about what the options are to solve that problem. And then the decision was made in 3 days. If that decision wasn't made in 3 days, then the change was not implemented, and we continued on with the project. But we adhered to that schedule religiously during the project to ensure that stuff stayed on schedule. Last but not least, you have to listen, listen, and listen. You have to especially listen to what's not being said. And what I mean by that is we had daily scrums every morning at 8 o'clock. They lasted about an hour, and they included the entire team. And it's important for leaders, and it's important for the project team to recognize when folks aren't saying something that needs to be said. If there are issues, They were raised at that meeting, and we resolved those issues, and we moved forward. But occasionally, you could see that there was some concern or some anxiety about a particular situation, and it was difficult for a team member to possibly raise that during the session. You need to be able to see that. You need to be able to react to it. You need to be able to address it, even though somebody doesn't specifically raise it as an issue. So you've got to be fully aware of what's going on in the project, both in those meetings and outside of those meetings, so you can continue to move the project forward.
Man, it's amazing. The 3-day rule sounds like a strong approach, but I'm sure there was some agony at times for people to make those decisions. You and Charlie must have really had to push the team hard to be able to accept those decisions. Anything you want to add on that?
Well, it was extremely important, Rick, again, because remember, we had a 12-month implementation cycle, okay? And many people felt that that was unachievable, even under the best of circumstances. And in order to ensure that you meet that schedule, you have to have those micro schedules embedded within the macro schedule so that to keep the project moving along. Okay, we didn't have any time not to make a decision. We had to make those decisions quickly. We had to respond as quickly as possible to any issues on the project to keep the project schedule on time. And it was important to make sure that particular requirement was not only understood by the team, but was actually part of our contract. It was specifically written in the contract what the requirements were for responding and making decisions about how to proceed. And that was imposed on both us and our vendors. So, you know, it was shared responsibility. It wasn't simply a DC Water, or it wasn't simply a Vertex responsibility, but it was a shared responsibility. And everybody knew going in what they signed up for.
Yeah, Rick, let me pile on that.
Please.
The daily scrums were very important, and we held them religiously. I think I can count on my one hand how many we canceled, which is very few. And also regarding decisions, most decisions were made in the scrum. There are a few decisions made in meetings outside of the scrum, but we didn't have to wait hours or days or weeks, but we made key decisions right away. So that also kept the project moving, because one of the sponsors, a lot of times both of the sponsors were in the scrum session. So that decision-making process was very good in meeting the timelines.
Shane, it sounds like we always hear you've got to have strong executive support. It sounds like you really had that as the leader of this program. You really had good executive support to make those decisions, it sounds like. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's very rare you get on an agile project, you get a product owner in every scrum. But this was the case during this project. Both Charlie and Tom not only were in the scrum, but they were helping us make key decisions right away. So that really helped out a lot.
Great. Tom, let me move on to another couple of topics here. I mean, we talk about better, cheaper, faster here. Can you talk about some of the benchmarks and how you maybe measured the project and the operation so far?
Yeah, well, again, our early benchmarks were our schedule. And, you know, certainly the budget. You know, as a public utility, we're responsible to meet maintain our budget and meet the objectives of the budget. But with respect to industry standards, which were recently shared at CIS Week in Tampa, in April, the TMG Consulting Group publishes a set of benchmarks for the industry that deal with schedule and cost and stabilization. And DC Water's project exceeded those benchmarks on all fronts. It's important to note that DC Water's project not only included a core CIS, but a customer portal, a new mobile work management system, a customer mobile app, and a new bill payment and presentment platform. But the typical Tier 1 implementation, as quoted by TMG Consulting, is 24 to 36 months. DC's for a CIS only, DC Water's implementation was 12 months for all 4 components. The typical implementation cost for CIS only is between $59 and $105 per customer, with an average cost of $82 per customer. DC Water's CIS only cost was $46, and our cost for all 4 components was actually $75. So again, exceeding traditional benchmarks by a substantial amount. Last but not least, our go-live stabilization period was only 5 months. And the typical stabilization period for a CIS implementation in a traditional Tier 1 implementation is actually between 9 and 12 months. Again, we almost cut that time in half. So the team did not only a tremendous job in the implementation, but also managing the financial aspects of the project, managing the schedule, but actually managing the long-term implementation of the project and achieve benchmarks that far exceed traditional benchmarks for similar type system implementations.
Okay.
More importantly, we've got very specific real dollar benefits that we've been able to identify for the system. And our goal is $22 million in savings over the 7-year life of the project. A small portion of those savings clearly comes from the cloud implementation because we offloaded the technical risk of the project because we didn't have to spin up a system on site. But the bulk of those savings actually come from process automation and improvements in the actual customer service arena to the tune of about $5 million annually over the 6-year life of the project. As we mentioned, we had a 7-year contract. 1 year was the implementation, 6 years of services. We're going to achieve an average savings of about $5 million through increased automation and business process improvement listed, in both the front office and the back office field operations, as well as some very complex consolidated billing capabilities that we have for both the federal government and the district government. And last but not least, we expect to save a fairly significant amount of dollars on changes to the new system. As I mentioned early in the discussion, a typical rate change in our old system would have taken anywhere from 6 to 8 months to implement and close to $1 million because everything that was changed with respect to a rate in the old system was custom code. Today we can configure those rate changes and in the course of a month actually make a rate change, test it, and implement it at a substantially reduced cost and a substantially reduced risk compared to our old system.
Great. And I guess, Chiden, to start wrapping up here, there was, I guess, 3 major metrics for the better, faster, cheaper. You want to kind of walk us through those real quick?
Sure. So better, at Go Live, we had 0 priority 1 defects. We had a very smooth cutover. We practiced the migration 8 times, so during the actual cutover, everything went really smooth. And upon Go Live, there was no production priority 1 defects. Also, from contract to Go Live in 12 months, I highlighted the methodology, and Tom highlighted some of the other key aspects to make that 12 months. But usually, this type of scope takes 18 to 24 months. We did it in 12 using the methodology and some of the other enablers. And cheaper, there's estimated $22 million in savings over the last 7 years based on what Tom highlighted before.
Okay, we're going to go through these questions now that we've been receiving. Here's the first one. Probably this one might be best for you, Tom. What were some of the biggest challenges with this agile approach?
I think probably the biggest started actually with just an understanding of the approach as it compared to traditional implementations of this type, and getting people comfortable with the accelerated pace of the implementation, but also the incremental approach to implementing functionality. Making them comfortable with the fact that while you were testing a piece of the process, you weren't able to fully test the entire process until the end, but the fact that validating and confirming something like a bill calculation online would actually benefit the entire project without actually having to see the results of that bill calculation on a piece of paper until perhaps 2 or 3 months later. So I think it was primarily just getting folks comfortable with the process itself, and being able to time box the implementation for folks so that they could understand that we could generate more value with the incremental approach as opposed to the big bang approach that systems like this have traditionally followed in the past.
Thank you. Thank you. Chai, this is probably best for you. You discussed your fast start methodology earlier in the session. Was there anything that wasn't in the fast start program that you had to build on in the middle of the project?
Sure. So although we utilized the bulk of our user story processes to meet the deliverables, there were several key areas that had to be customized. One was the landlord-tenant process. That had to be customized to meet some of the regulatory processes within DC Water. Also, collection strategies during the dunning process was also customized a bit. And then another big area was collective billing, the calculations and bill presentment, mainly because of the way federal billing is handled at DC Water.
Okay, great. Thank you. Tom, I think this one's best for you. It says, how much as-is documentation was provided before the project started?
Yep. Pure documentation probably was in the range of 30 to 35%, Rick, I'd say. But that was quickly expanded as we went through the fit gap analysis, where we would sit down and we would take our specific requirements, and we had upwards of 3,000 of them, specific requirements, match those to the delivered functionality of the system, and then determine whether or not the system capabilities met our needs or whether we had to adjust, and then develop a specific gap analysis for how to address that piece of functionality. So that very quickly grew over the course of the 5 sprints. But what was more important, I'd say, was the fact that we really had a live system available to us as we were reviewing functionality, where we could actually look at DC Water specific data in the system and how it actually was presented to make those decisions about whether or not the functionality would meet our needs or not. So I think over and beyond the documentation, the most critical piece that we had available to us was that system, and being able to look at that system online as we were making decisions on how things would operate and how they would be configured.
So you're seeing the whole pre-configured components, and they're showing you, here's how it works, walking you through it, doing iterations live, and y'all are making decisions based on that live interaction with the application, it sounds like.
Yeah, that was even more valuable than the written documentation, because you could actually see the system operating almost day one.
That's amazing. I think this next question is best suited for probably you, Charlie, here. Modern systems are configurable now. How are you able to take advantage of these unique configurations for you guys in this fast-paced project approach?
Yeah, I think for the most part, the core system, the Vertex 1, which was our customer information system, that was clearly predominantly in the Agile method. We had laid out the requirements well in advance. Actually, we started with well over 3,200, and part of the system was configured before we even started. And then we went through the various use cases we had to see which requirements would be part of Go Live and which ones we could defer, and then which ones were not needed. And from that perspective, it worked very well for us. We basically covered in 5 sprints. As you know, this project also had 3 other applications. One was our Kona mobile solution for work management that we were implementing. We were also implementing a new customer portal. And lastly, we were also doing bill presentment and payment. So in effect, we were 4 applications going simultaneously. Clearly, in the customer information side, it was a predominantly Agile methodology was employed, and what helped us get through, as I said, we had 5 sprints, and each one, obviously, as you get closer to the beginning of the next sprint, you're rushing to complete, but for the most part, the process worked very, very well. On the customer side, on the customer portal side, it was predominantly here are the requirements we're laying out. We implemented, before we implemented the customer information system, predominantly if we had any bugs to work out, we wanted to identify those and capture and resolve them before we went go live on the main project, which was CIS. In terms of bill presentment and payment, that somewhat the process itself was a little challenging because you're in queue waiting for us to start, and as you get nearer implementation, you always have those jitters on whether we're not going to make it, but we did. So for the most part, the approach worked very, very well for us. And as I said, I guess the proof is in the pudding. We had locked our project team in a room on January 4th, and we basically opened the doors on December 11th and said, here, we're done. And for the most part, we accomplished most of what we wanted to accomplish under the initial project.
One quick question on that. It sounds like they presented you a configuration, and then you guys were able to see that and keep quickly moving. You weren't starting with a blank sheet of paper, I guess, is my question. Is that kind of right?
Yeah, I would say for the most part, what we tried to do, what we did do, not tried to do, is that we looked at the core functionality of the product itself. And, you know, there are certain processes within the SAP or the customer information system that, you know, DC water is not going to set the world on fire if we're doing it a different way. So what we really did is focus on limiting customization of the core product itself. You know, a meter reading is a meter reading. How the system processes it is the same whether it's in Washington, D.C. or in Tacoma, Washington, I mean, for the most part. So we made every stride to stay with the core configuration, and then looked at things that were unique to DC water, and those were the things that we would, in effect, customize, but to a far lesser degree than somebody coming in and saying, hey, this is our meter reading process, we want the product to follow our process, which was not the case. So unless it was something very specific and unique to DC water, we limited customization across the board, and we had a very rigorous change management process to do that, especially on the change control for the project. So nice to have, also had to become, for the most part, was not done. You know, a business case was supplied for everything that we needed to do that was core to DC water, and presuming that it met the criteria for that business case and it's something we absolutely needed, then we would do it. Otherwise, that was sort of a nice to have. We'll look at it later on, but right now we're moving forward with the core configuration as it is. So.
All right, China, I think this next question is for you. Did you utilize a mechanized testing tool, and did you have it in-house before the project started? Maybe that's for you and Tom, but you start, China.
Okay, sure. Yes, we did. We used Solution Manager, Test Manager, and Incident Manager. We use that to run our testing cycles, including identifying and building test scenarios, bundling test cases within those scenarios, making assignments, and also test execution and defect management. So we use the Solution Manager, Test, and Defect Management suite to run all the testing processes within this project.
Okay, great. Tom, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, from a pure testing perspective, Chidon's absolutely right. Those were the two critical components to the testing process. Over and above, actually, the test script development and documentation, but those were critical to the success of the project.
Okay, great. So you had tools, SAP tools, utilized their methodology to get it going. You weren't using Excel spreadsheets, so that sounds like a great approach. Next question, I think this is probably for you as well, Tom. Tom, you stated in the past that CIO in Cloud First Model stands for Chief Integration Office. Can you explain?
Yeah, I think that the difference comes with the fact that I allude to Lego blocks, right? A Lego block by itself provides limited capability. It's your ability to plug those things together where you can create something that is of value, right? So if we look at all of the pieces that we deployed, whether it was the customer system, the portal, the work management system, the bill payment presentment system, integration, or our IVR application, our asset management system, and the host of systems that we have running here on the back end that actually have customer-related components associated with them. The key was making all of those systems work together to deliver a solution that was created more valuable than any piece by itself, okay? So the sum of the parts is greater than the individual parts. and the reality is that comes through integration, right? So being able to make those things work together, not only from an application level and a data level perspective, but a communications perspective, okay? Because we've got multiple cloud systems running, but we also have multiple on-premise systems running, making sure that those systems operate effectively and there are no data latency issues and things are updated as they occur is really where the focus is now, rather than on making sure a particular calculation by itself works. So the key is creating these systems and architecting them in a way that allows them to function together seamlessly.
Yeah, great. Charlie, I think this next question might be best suited for you as well. Next two, actually. What's the top 2 or 3 advantages you're finding now that you've got the system in the cloud?
Oh, clearly from an operations perspective, not having to, the headache, I guess, of managing an application as large as a customer information system in-house is clearly a benefit for DC Water as a whole. I mean, for the most part, it's very hard to find staff personnel to manage these as an in-house solution to begin with, and that was part of the decision we had made when we were looking to move it to the cloud. And then dealing, as I said earlier, keeping customization to a minimum as we were configuring the system clearly gives us a nice upgrade path for all the releases, which can easily be managed through the cloud versus trying to do it in-house in addition to everything else we have to manage and monitor here. So for us, that was a clear benefit and long-term cost savings as we took the total life cycle costs of the project when we were trying to figure out which way we were going to go. Another advantage, obviously, is that really the timeliness and responsiveness of the system, right? We have had absolutely zero issues with regards to connectivity. I think it's far better suited to with regards to security of the system. We've had absolutely no issues regarding that. And for the most part, like I said, it's much easier to manage from an operations side, not having to deal with all of those changes in-house and internal, because we are a 365, 7-day 365 operation. So there are clearly some benefits on being in the cloud.
Okay, great. I think we've got another one here I think it makes sense for you, Charlie. Actually, I'm going to rephrase that. Charlie, here's another question I think that's best suited for you. How are you guys able to staff the project and continue your successful operations?
I ask myself that question every day, to be honest with you. This was a challenge initially. What we wanted to do initially, we identified what we thought was going to be what we would need for resources for the core project. And then we learn as we're moving along that those resources weren't sufficient. So we had over 45 people, combination predominantly customer services type people, and obviously the information technology or IT group. And then what we did is we dedicated those people specific to the project. We identified the SMEs associated with them, and we identified who the project leads would be with regards to those SMEs. They were instructed to clear, actually it was on a volunteer basis, but they were interviewed as part of volunteering to make sure that they had the skills sets that we needed to move this project along. Many of the people that we selected or asked to volunteer were people that were somewhat new to DC Water, or the utility business as a whole. Many of them were analysts and project managers or project leads or program managers that in many cases have only been here 3 or 4 years. And so they didn't really have that I hate to say it, that long-lived utility experience that sometimes is reluctant to change. So they were open to new ideas, and they kept control, especially on the sprints and managing their time to make sure that we covered all of the requirements we had to do on our half for DC Water. what we did as part of it was they were instructed or told once they were selected for the project to basically put a sign up on their desk or door saying we're not employed here in DC Water anymore, we're working on the project for all intents and purposes. And we did. We literally, we identified we hired some lease space. We took them, although it's near where DC Water is, it wasn't on DC Water property. We put some lease space out there, and they reported to that every morning. And whether they work 5 days a week or 7 days a week, you know, they always reported to that location and did not have to go back to their real job, so to speak. So that process, what we did is, and it was challenging, I'm being honest with you, what we did is we took the opportunity to cross-train other people from different areas within DC Water to give them the opportunity to learn something around customer services or around billing or around credit and collections or metering while these people were taking off for the project. So from that perspective, it worked out wonderfully because not only did the core project team, you know, actually work on a very large-scale system and really get to understand the entire revenue cycle from meter to cash, I also got the benefit of the people that were filling in on their behalf who had the responsibility for managing those areas to learn those areas and to see if they were interested moving forward as a possible career path for them too. So it was a two-pole benefit, but I'm not going to say it was easy because it wasn't. You know, each one of the people that we took off for the project actually had a full-time job. So so the people that we were supplemented also had a full-time job. So we used a combination of, we took some, you know, hired some temporary people to backfill some of the positions, and the other, we just started shifting the workload, you know, outside of customer services to some of my other report areas, so in fact we could get the project done. And as I said, it was kind of a joke, but we kind of locked them on the door, behind the door on January 4th. We opened the door on December 11th and started rolling out the, when I say rolling it out, confirming and testing to make sure that everything we'd done as each of the cycles started billing, you know, that we didn't send out any bad bills. So, you know, from that perspective, it was a wonderful learning opportunity for a very large group of people, not just the 40-some-odd, 45 or 44 that participated in the project, but also the 30 or 40 people that we used to backfill them and learn other parts of the area. So, you know, from that perspective, I see the benefit of that today, you know, 6 or 8 months after implementation, although it was a struggle for the first 11 months. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't. Mm-hmm.
You know, it just seems like staffing these projects, at least properly staffing these projects, is the hardest thing to do. Sounds like you guys did a great job.
Most definitely, but you know, and I would add that, you know, you actually have to, if you're going to do this type of a project, if you don't have dedicated staff to the project team, then that to me is the greatest risk of not delivering the product on time or as you move forward with these, especially in these large type projects.
Yeah, I've seen some utilities in the mid-market and some smaller utilities that are doing big projects.
Right.
I think they're going to have their eight key employees that are the sort of the business owners of that area. Well, they'll spend 10% of their time on the project. I'm like, that's just not going to work. You know?
Oh, sure. You know, and I would also add that it was really, and from many respects, it was nice to have people that, you know, like I said, that didn't have that. You know, we've always done it this way, because change management in these types of projects is challenging also. So getting some people that weren't that familiar with the utility business through the meter to cash process, it actually opened their eyes to challenge some of the requests that came in, which helped limit some of the customization that usually comes along with these large type projects. And from that perspective, that was a wonderful opportunity for us.
There's lots of fear around cybersecurity in general still out there, especially with cloud solutions. Can you explain how you became comfortable with that topic, Tom?
Yeah, I think the important thing to look at here is that, you know, on a daily basis, all of us use one form of cloud solution or another through our personal smartphones. So the reality is we're using the cloud every day. And we're comfortable with it from a personal perspective, but yet we're a bit hesitant from a commercial perspective. And I think in some cases that particular fear comes out of the unknown to some extent, but also a reluctance to release control. And I think, you know, if you accept the fact that, you know, the future is in the cloud, then you have to accept the fact that you need to release a certain level of control. But the reality is that the best providers out there have the ability to implement security profiles and capabilities that generally exceed, at a minimum meet, and in a lot of cases exceed the things that a utility, especially a small utility, could ever hope to implement on their own, simply because of the cost, but also because of how quickly the whole cybersecurity arena changes on a daily basis. So you don't abdicate your responsibility for cloud security. You just have to make sure that your vendors implement an approach that you can validate and that you can ensure that is comparable to what you would do internally. And in many cases, it is. And if it isn't, you shouldn't use that cloud provider. It's as simple as that, because there are a number of them out there, and it's most important for them because we're not their only customer. But it's more important for them to be more secure than it even is for us to be secure, because they risk not only our business, but they risk the business of every other customer that they have.
We've got lots of questions. Everybody, please feel free to keep sending them. Also, if we don't get to your question, Dave, please feel free to reach out to the panelists for any additional questions. You should see their contact data on the screen now. I know they'll be glad to respond back to you. Got a few more questions here. We'll keep going. I think this question is probably best for you and Chide and Tom. Now that this project is over, would you do anything different? For example, a tweak to the Agile approach, or something with the team, anything like that you would tweak?
Chide, you want to handle that first?
Sure, I can go first. I think some extra time on data cleanup, specifically for some of the meter data, would have saved us some time and defects during the various mock migrations. Also, I would not over-engineer the tools. We utilize a lot of tools. Some of them are utilized for both Agile and Waterfall, but keep it simple. We moved at such a fast pace, we don't need to confuse or burden our team with overcomplicated processes within the tools that were designed for Waterfall. We had full requirements, traceability, delivery, and testing with basic tool functionality, so we can be dynamic and flexible.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not sure if this is even possible, Rick, but I have to say it because, the reality is we had a team of people who had very little exposure to major systems of this type, and that was both a two-edged sword in the sense that they didn't have any preconceived, biases to one way or another. But as such, they didn't have the experience, right? So there was a bit of a learning curve there, trying to get folks up to speed. And this whole solution set was entirely new to us as an organization, not necessarily from a functionality perspective, but from a software perspective and the look and the feel and how things worked. In a perfect world, folks would have had a little bit more time to get familiar with the tools and the software before jumping into the project work. We didn't have that opportunity, so in some cases things were probably not as smooth as they could have been, but the reality is that the team still met a 12-month schedule, so that's an incredible accomplishment even absent that. But I think, if you had a SAP background, certainly implementing SAP would be a little easier than not. And I think that's probably the only thing that I would say, that we could refine or hope to achieve in the future, with some of the newer systems we're looking at.
Gotcha. So if possible, get the client, the utility side of the team, more exposure to the process, the methodology, a little bit of software exposure as early as you can before the project starts, if possible. Yeah. But it's kind of hard to do. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to do because of our process here to get approval to proceed.
Right.
To begin with, and we had to have a contract in hand before we could expose the system to folks. So it wasn't like we could, spin up an application and let people start looking at it while we were in the contract negotiation phase and things like that, because we simply, just can't do that. But that may be slightly different for a private company, but it's certainly not easy for a public company like us to do some things in advance of having a written contract in place.
Gotcha. Thank you. This next question is regarding configuration. They're asking, were you able to have your users configure the system in an agile manner as well? Maybe you take that one, Tom.
Yeah, well, again, our agreement with Vertex is really a managed services agreement. So pure configuration, they do for us as part of the services that we contract with them for. It's our responsibility to define what those configurations ought to be, whether, thresholds or A, B, C, and D, whether, rate structures are two-tiered, four-tiered, whatever, what the cycle time for notices on collection cycles and all those things are. But again, our teams work side by side, and each team was focused on a particular portion of the system, whether it was the financial aspects, whether it was billing, whether it was collections. So within those teams, and the fact that they were working together, they could test those configurations as they were finalizing the requirements for the system as part of the fit gap analysis. So, yeah, they could make those changes and they could test those changes and see how the system reacted using actually DC water data. So you could look at a customer on the old system, you could look at the customer on the new system, and you could see them both, and you could see how the required change you're considering is actually impacting that particular customer's bill on the new system as you're deciding which options to select.
Okay, great. But I guess when I hear Agile, and I think other people as well, we're thinking programming. But your Agile methodology is, how do I configure? I've got these things pre-configured, and y'all were able to adapt very quickly with setting up and adjusting the configuration for the solution. Fair? Is that fair assessment, Chad?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Okay, great. All right, we got lots of questions coming in here. Somewhere here we talked about, so you talked about mobile work management. Is that part of the SAP EAM application?
No, it's actually a separate, distinct application, Rick. It's a product called Kona from a company called Confluence, but it actually is part of our agreement with Vertex. So it's part of our contract, and they're responsible for managing and operating that system as part of the larger deployment. It is fully integrated with SAP, the service notification piece. So real-time updates from the field are actually posted back to SAP, and work order completion activity is fully integrated in real time. So as meters get changed, turn-ons and shut-offs get processed, that information is exchanged with SAP in real time, and those updates are made in real time. So if a service technician is en route, arrived, he's completed a job, that data is available in real time to not only the customer service reps, but ultimately the customer.
Okay, great. Got a couple more questions here. Tom, this one's a little bit off of the earlier plan discussion, but in regards to functionality, based on this model with Vertex One you guys are utilizing, you're continually throwing out new capabilities. I know you had a lot of requirements to find. Are y'all just every month or so adding a new configuration or changing and enhancing things as part of this, sort of a continuous improvement process?
Well, we're looking at opportunities to take advantage of functionality that's available now in the application that wasn't available to us before on a regular basis. But we've got like the project implementation process and change control process, we have an internal process to evaluate what folks are asking for and then to prioritize those things based on the value they create for the business. So we're not simply just implementing functionality because it seems like a good thing. You know, we've got a requirement to prove the business value internally of adding that functionality, and then in cooperation with Vertex, then we decide when we're going to deploy that functionality in the system.
Okay.
So it is very much part of a continuous improvement process, but it's a controlled improvement process. It's not simply an ad hoc process.
I see. So new functionality just doesn't magically appear. You're actually planning through it. Okay, great. We're just about out of time, but we'll ask one more question. Again, everyone listening, please feel free to reach out to the panelists directly with any questions. You should see their email address and contact data on the screen. Tom, I believe you'll also be attending Cloud for Utilities Summit this year and hopefully delivering an educational session. If anyone has any other questions about Cloud for Utilities, please feel free to give me a line. Last question, gentlemen. I'll let both of you kind of take a stab at it. And once you start first, Chiden, and let Tom kind of finish it up. But what do you see as the top 2 or 3 advantages you're finding for the new system in the cloud now?
So in the cloud, we can measure and track the system, the performance, and the capabilities very closely. Also, upgrades are planned and structured, and as we roll out functionality, we can roll it out based on the client's needs. So we are on an N-1 strategy, so everything is pretty much up to date. You're not many versions behind.
Tom, from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd say the single biggest advantage is really our ability to refocus our people on solution delivery as opposed to, you know, stringing cable, tuning servers, optimizing storage, and upgrading and patching systems. I mean, you know, those are all critical pieces of a successful IT delivery model. But those are things that provide, on the surface, very little direct value to the business. And I want my staff to be out there talking to my business partners about what's important to them, what challenges they have, and then coming up with solutions to solve those problems, not sitting back here in the office, you know, taking care of the routine and the mundane operational aspects of an IT shop. And that's what we've contracted with Vertex to do for us, is to manage the technology from a physical perspective and a performance perspective so that we can focus on the solutions and driving benefits into the business rather than simply, you know, maintaining the physical aspects of a system.
In closing, Charlie, anything else you want to add about the overall project?
Yeah, from a personal perspective, you know, I personally have been in the utility business for a long period of time, and, you know, I thought I had done my last customer information system over a decade ago. and as people know, these are probably the most difficult project to implement. So I had reservations going in, personal reservations about, you know, how we were going to deliver, could we deliver, and especially in the time frame we laid out. But I thought the project methodology we employed was absolutely wonderful, and the experience so far has been very solid. Obviously, there's a shakeout period in all of these types of projects, but for the most part, we were able to deliver bills. I haven't seen anything unusual that, you know, when you're seeing that $1 million bill that comes floating around, that hasn't happened in here. And if I had to say one thing, we probably put too tight of controls to eliminate any customer problems moving forward. But in doing so, for the most part, you know, it has been transparent, especially to our customers, and that was the key here. We wanted everything that we did to be transparent to our customers, and I said from that perspective, I'm extremely confident that we succeeded.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone, to our panelists. That concludes our presentation today. Wonderful job. Thank you, everyone. Great information. For additional information about Cloud for Utilities, please follow us on LinkedIn for new and upcoming webinars. Thank you very much.